Okay, so we're going to continue on Indisputable Truth. We're on page 15. We're on the intelligent design section. Just to quickly give a summary of all the stuff we went through. So we said, why is it important to learn this topic? Two reasons. Number one, the idea was curiosity. Like, how can you not want to know if there's a God and if there's a purpose to life? How can you not want to know what the purpose is, right? And the second idea is that we don't want to live our life through faith, blind faith. Right? Every religion says blind faith. How do you know it's true? Just believe. No evidence or nothing. Judaism is not like that. Judaism says there's evidence. There's evidence of how you know God exists. The Torah is from God. That rabbis didn't make it up. There's evidence for everything, and we want to know why, because as Jews we're going to invest a lot of time in money towards being a Jew. Buying, for example, you buy etrog. It's like a lemon. $50 for an etrog. What? Why should I do that? If it's just or sending your kids to Jewish school. Or like fasting, why should I fast if there's no point, right? So if you really understand the truth, the foundations of Judaism, of how it's true, then you're going to take it seriously, right? And then so that was like the whole thing. And then we went to the ideas we need to consider before beginning of bias, cognitive dissonance, lack of knowledge and criticism, those topics. And then we went to the topic of evidence for a creator. We disproved atheism, how that logically can't be. Some of us say they're an atheist. We said about how being an agnostic is false also, because there's no substitute also, because being even agnostic, at the end of the day you have to make a decision of when it comes to action. We live in a practical world, right? And we talk about idea versus probability versus improbability, where we're not about possible. Anything is possible. We want to go on probability. So just because something is possible, maybe aliens wrote the Torah. Yeah, is that possible? Yeah, but is it probable? No. Right? We don't live life on possibilities. We go on probabilities. And then we talk about the idea versus belief versus knowledge, that you want to you don't want to just believe, you want to know God exists and the Torah is from God. And then we went into the proofs of how you know God exists. So we go into the first cause argument, which is basically the argument that there must be a first cause. If everything is finite and physical, right, that must come from something and that must come from something. Then you go to the Big Bang, which is the first finite and physical. Before that, there was no time. What created the Big Bang? It can be something finite and physical, because then you're going to ask the same question, what created that? So it must be whatever created the Big Bang is not finite and not physical, which means infinite, right? So we went to the whole idea how there must be a first cause, an infinite first cause, God. And now we're on this, so that's like the first proof of God, like the first piece of compelling evidence for God. Now we're in the second piece, which is intelligent design. And we have all the previous videos, I uploaded video number 1, video number 2 on the subject we already went over, just for people if they want to catch up. Okay, so we're going to read it inside, like I said, but I'm going to read it inside and paraphrase. And if you guys have any questions, we could always stop in the middle and go through it. And if you have counter arguments, we could always touch upon it. Okay, so let's go. Intelligent design theory. Merely looking at the remarkable design and intricacies of the world. And if you look in the book, we have an image to the left, showing the earth, showing the human body, DNA, animal life, plant life, right? You could see by looking at the design, evidence for a creator's existence. The idea that design points to a designer is called intelligent design theory. For example, if you see a phone, a camera, a shirt, a chair, you know it had to have a creator, and it did not form by itself. The more complex the idea or object is, the more intelligent you consider the maker. Imagine someone who makes a chair. That isn't such a big deal, but if you were to build a computer from scratch, that would be a whole another level. Simply put, the greatness of the creation reveals the greatness of the creator. By examining how well a computer operates, we can determine its creator's intelligence. When a person looks at the world, how it works, and how awesome it is, it does not make sense that there's no designer or creator. So this is, I feel like, is the best example. I actually asked a few atheists this example, and whatever, we'll go through it. So if you were to walk in the middle of a desert and find an iPhone, would you say there was a windstorm that caused all the pieces to form together over billions of years? Obviously not. Since we clearly see that the iPhone shows intelligent design, we would not assume it came together by chance, because it is too ordered, and statistically it is nearly impossible for it to have formed on its own. Therefore, it must have a creator. The same could be applied to the creation of life and the universe itself. Since it is so ordered and complex, it seems that it must have a creator. In other words, design points to the designer. Meaning what? Just like the guy who goes through the desert and finds an iPhone will never in a million years say, you know what happened? An explosion happened, pieces came together, and the iPhone formed and has 100% battery. Would you ever say that created itself, the iPhone? So why do we say the universe created by itself? Why do we say the universe? The universe is 10 billion times more complex than the iPhone, right? It's the same exact question. If we assume this has, why do we assume the iPhone didn't create it by itself? Because it has design. Design points to designer. They say that example that Abraham, right? He used the first cause, how did Avram come to the being of understanding that there's a God? He used two arguments, which even without science, they're very logical arguments to coming to God. The first cause argument, he asked himself, what created this, what created that, what created that? Then eventually something had to create everything, right? Something above all those things. It can't be bound by the same rules. So he used first cause, and the other argument he used was intelligent design. His way of the argument was, imagine you walk in the forest and you see a house in the forest built with wood. It's at perpendicular. There's a roof. There's everything. He would say, you never say the house created by itself. You say that it has a baal bayit. It has an owner. There's somebody who owns this house. Someone who made this house. Same idea with the world. So he used we call it kal v'chomer, from like I don't know how to say it in English, but from if I'll give you like the translation maybe or like the explanation, you'll understand the meaning. For example, if a guy could pick up 500 pounds, kal v'chomer, needless to say, he could pick up 5 pound weight, right? Same thing here. If the world, if this house was built, by somebody, and that's complex, kal v'chomer, needless to say, the universe, which is 10 times more complex than this house, the human brain, DNA and all these things, right? Epigenetics, all these complex things in biology that we studied, obviously that can't be formed on its own. It has to be, an intelligent designer. So yeah.
In terms of evolution, though,
yeah.
You're saying that's Hashem iterating?
Yeah, great question. So usually the people use evolution as a counter argument to intelligent design, to say, oh, you know why there's intelligent design? Because there's evolution. Because basically what happened is that you have so many trial and error that obviously you're going to get some good that comes out of it. And over time, that good is going to, you're going to keep getting lucky until you get a human being. So in the book, how we go over it, how we basically in the appendix, we have a whole section on evolution. Whenever we get there, I'll explain it more there, but just to say it now, the idea is what? If you want to even know if evolution, right? If you want to know that's true, what's the probability of evolution? Let's see the probability of that. Okay, we say it all happened by itself. You know what the probability is? What's the probability of a human cell coming into existence? 1 over 10 to the 18th power. That's one cell. We're made out of billions of cells, yeah? So what's the probability, say, for a human body to come? 1 over 10 to the 1.25 trillion. Meaning 0.0001.25 trillion 1. That's the probability if evolution did happen, that it all came randomly. So the problem with evolution is that people try using it as a theory to disprove God. They say you don't need a God because it could just happen by itself. But when you look at the probability of it and the stats, but then you can answer the universe was always existing. So then that could be. But the answer is no. Science proved that the universe had a beginning. And we prove logically that there was a Big Bang. Before the Big Bang, there was no space, no time. So in 15 billion years, or whatever, 13.8 billion years, if people assume that's the age of the universe, and we have a whole section on that of explaining how that's not a contradiction with what the Torah says, whatever. But the idea is what? That if there's 13.8 billion years, let's assume that number, even the amount of times it would take for us to be here is almost impossible, right? And the fine-tuning argument, actually we're going to get more into this, of like going against evolution. But the idea is what? That if you want to believe in microevolution, that's for sure. That's a proven fact. But macroevolution, if someone wants to believe it, they could believe it. But to say it happened by itself and there's no God, why can't you just say God, in a sense? If someone does believe in that theory, why can't they say God brought it about? I would think God brought it about. There was nothing and then there was something. And then the probability of that coming to forming us, from going from inanimate to animate to the first, biological soup, even that's zero, like the probability of that happening. So, like if someone wants to go on that assumption, yeah, but there's a chance, whatever, then I might as well. I think it's it's a bigger chance to believe that God didn't create that system than saying God did create it. Right?
I agree.
So yeah, let's continue, but great question. So let's go to, I don't know if you guys learned the laws of thermodynamics. Basically, it says in the second law of thermodynamics that the universe is constantly going in a state of order to chaos. So you have everything is ordered, and eventually that order breaks away to chaos. We have a picture right here in the book that shows it. So you have for example, let's say the Big Bang, right? The Big Bang was a singularity. It was one entity. That entity was perfect. It was ordered. And what happened? It eventually expanded, and now it keeps getting bigger and breaking away and like expanding and going in from a state of order to chaos. So everything in this world follows the laws of entropy. The law of entropy states that everything in this world is constantly going in a state of chaos and decay. That means everything is decaying. Why are we aging right now? Because of the laws of entropy, right? Our bodies are breaking apart. Our atoms themselves, they wear out. That's why we have a battery life on our lives, in a sense. In other words, everything is breaking apart. All molecules are moving away from each other and are slowly breaking apart. Therefore, a state of order can only be achieved when a force acts upon it to make it orderly. Meaning what? You can never, if everything is going to chaos, you can only get order if something acts upon the chaos. For example, let's say we're in a room and everything is organized in your room, right? The longer you stay in the room, right, automatically entropy happens. What? You move things around, you move this, you move that, it gets disordered. Now, the only way your room is going to go from a state of chaos where everything is all over the place, your books here, your shoes are on the table, whatever, when it's going to get cleaned, your room, when it's going to get ordered, is only if something acts upon that to make it orderly. Without you acting upon it, it will never automatically itself become organized. So the same thing with Earth. If the Earth is in a state of order, you had the Big Bang and everything went from a state of order to chaos, then it is reasonable to say that there is some unknown force that is acting upon the Earth to make it orderly, to bring about from the Big Bang this massive, billions and trillions of molecules all over the place that have no order, that have no connection, but to connect it all to the chance that it makes an Earth, and then from the Earth comes a human being, and all that stuff, and the complexity of human being and complexity of human life. You see that something must have acted upon it, because you don't get order out of chaos unless something acts upon it. And we say here in the footnote that this unknown force is responsible for orchestrating the extremely improbable events that have made life and existence on Earth and on the habitable Earth possible. What I just explained. A person could call this force whatever he wants, but the Torah calls this unknown force God. Okay, fine. So take this step to take this idea a step further. Imagine if you were going to an atheist professor. I actually myself, when I was in college, I went to my professor and I asked him this question. So let's say you take an atheist professor who believes the entire universe was created on its own, and you tell him that you were walking in an alley and found an iPhone, which you claim naturally formed over billions of years. The professor would probably think that you're out of your mind and recommend a psychiatric treatment for saying something so improbable and foolish. You then ask the professor, what is more complex, this iPhone or the brain of a human being? Obviously, you would answer the brain of a human being. A human's brain has over 100 trillion neural connections, perfectly aligned with one another, and each neuron is 10,000 times thinner than a piece of hair. If the neurons in the communications among the nerves did not work properly, a person would be at risk of stroke or permanent brain damage. It is estimated that the brain has around 2.5 million gigabytes. On the other hand, the iPhone has a couple hundred gigabytes. In addition, the brain processes information much faster than the world's fastest supercomputer, which is obviously much faster than the iPhone. Now, if an iPhone with its complex design and function has a creator, then it seems that our complex brain, which is very intricate which has a very intricate design and function, would also have a creator. In regards to the idea of intelligent design, Paul Davies, a renowned theoretical physicist, said that the appearance of design is overwhelming. Even the scientists are saying there's so much design. It's overwhelming how much design in the universe. And I didn't bring out all the examples like right now when we're speaking. Because there's so many examples. But like if we really study the topic and you really go through and you study the human body, just take a bio class. When I was studying bio, and I was studying molecular biology, and I was studying genetics and all this stuff, the body is so complex. And every time I was learning, I kept telling myself, how the heck did this just come by itself? How is that possible? How did this plant life, cell life, if you ever learn about epigenetics, this is so complex, so much things going involved, nucleotides and all this stuff, so many things going together. I kept asking myself, how do people really believe that this just happened on its own? And I even challenged my bio professor in college. I'm like, come on, how do you really believe this all came by itself? Like, yeah, of course I believe that came by itself. But you know what? I realized when I talked to the professor that even the professor themselves they have an agenda. They want to believe whatever they want to believe in. Believing in God, kind of in a sense, brings you, like I said in the beginning of the book, if you believe in God, there's morality, there's good and bad. You can't do whatever you want. And actually, there's a really good quote by an atheist. It's actually on my phone right now, but we're using it to record. But do you have WhatsApp or no? Do you have me on my WhatsApp status? I want to read you the quote. I think it's such a beautiful quote, just explaining this whole idea of why people, Yeah, wait, go more. Yeah, right here. So Aldous Huxley, he's like a really big atheist. He said, I had a motive for not wanting the world to have meaning, right? Because if there's no God, there's no meaning. Consequently, assumed it had none and was able without any difficulty to find satisfying reasons for this assumption. Meaning, like, I'm trying to look for whatever theory to, prove that there's no meaning, there's no purpose, there's no God, basically, right? For myself, the philosophy of meaninglessness was essentially an instrument of liberation, sexual and political. Meaning, if there's no God, basically there's no good and bad, and you can do whatever the heck you want. You want to have, do sexual like stuff with whoever you want to. If it's a married woman, if it's this gender, that gender, it doesn't matter. There's no good and bad. You can do whatever you want. And political, abortion, all this kind of stuff. You basically, if there's no God, there's no good and bad, right? So the funny, the rabbi who made this quote, he says, "Wow, there's finally an honest atheist." That's literally, that's what I realized with, and a lot of them never, I said this from the beginning. I don't know if I mentioned it before, but if you know Torah, if you want to have an opinion on Torah and science, you have to be holding in both topics. If you're only holding in Torah and no science, you can't have an opinion. If you're only in science, like my professor, but have no background of what Torah is, never studied Bible, never really studied the commentaries and all that stuff, and going through it in depth, you can't have a reason. You need to be holding in both topics to really say or not, and have an opinion on that topic. So the idea is what? That the bottom line is design points to designer, just as every creation has a creator. So we see from the complexity of the whole universe, and just the more you study all these subjects, you see that there has to be an intelligent designer. There has to be a creator. And so that's intelligent design. So now a kind of a sub-section of intelligent design is the fine-tuned universe. So it's kind of what we were saying before. The fine-tuned universe. Another way we can see intelligent design is by analyzing the placement of our planets in our solar system, which allows the Earth to sustain life. There are hundreds of parameters needed in order for a planet to produce and sustain life, every single one of which must be perfectly met or the whole thing falls apart. For example, if the Earth was too close to the Sun, everything would burn. And if it was too far, everything would freeze. Also, Jupiter's placement in our solar system is positioned such that, if not for its gravitational pull, many large asteroids will collide with the Earth, destroying all life in the process. Meaning, the bigger you are, the more gravitational pull you have. The fact that Jupiter is in the perfect position, there's literally meteorites. It's hard to see in this picture right here, but there's meteorites between, I think, Earth and Mars. And basically, we'd be pelted with meteorites, and there would be no Earth. There would be basically no Earth. It would be like 20 nuclear bombs every day basically hitting us. But because Jupiter happened to be there coincidentally in the perfect spot, and it's so big, it's one of the biggest planets, it's so, the bigger you are, right, the bigger mass, the stronger the gravitational pull. That's why it's saving us from basically taking all the darts of the meteorites. Oh, coincidence, right? Or same thing, the Earth being too close to the sun, or if it was too close, it would burn. If it was too far, it would freeze. Just too many factors, right? So that's just with the Earth, and by the way, we didn't even mention here the idea of the Earth coming from nothingness, but right, you have nothing and then something. How do you get just the Big Bang coming? You need like different factors, and that's basically statistically impossible. So we go back to what I was saying before. With that being said, what is the probability that the Earth would be placed in the most perfect spot in the solar system, enabling it to harbor life, specifically human life? The probability for just one enzyme, a protein, to evolve through the inanimate, meaning from the inanimate, you had inanimate, not living, right? So, like, for example, rocks, meteors, all that kind of stuff. Those are not inanimate, elements, all that stuff. So going from inanimate to animate. Animate means life, like cells and stuff like that. The probability is 1 over 10 to the 39,950. That's just for one protein, one enzyme. And then, furthermore, the probability of humans coming to existence by evolving through spontaneous generation, meaning that there was no God, no nothing, it just happened on its own, is 1 over 10 to the 1.25 trillion. Like I said, 0.00001.25 trillion 01, right? So in other words, the probability of this happening is almost zero. That's the probability of everything happening. To put this into perspective, this is the same probability as rolling a double six with dice 100 trillion times in a row. Imagine I get a dice, you're playing backgammon, you get double six 100 trillion times in a row, you get double sixes. If I played with you backgammon and that happened, what would you say? Bro, your dice are rigged. Cheating. So again, they're saying in this respect, but when it comes to, the Earth coming by itself, it's okay, This idea is absolutely mind-blowing. And yet people often think it was all a coincidence and everything was created around me. It just happened, I'll tell you what happened that really got me. When I was in my bio class, I was in a public, whatever, a bio class. So there's a lot of Jews, non-Jews, whatever. And it was at a non-Jewish college. And when, I was there for 2 years and I transferred to a Jewish college. And what happened was that my bio professor, basically, imagine everyone's, like there's 60 people, 70 people taking a test. And then 2 people basically had the same Scantron. Now, to have the same Scantron means they had the same answers wrong. Like, let's say answer 49, and they had the same wrong answer, right? So, few wrong and the same, like the A, B, C, D, E, right? They both try B wrong for this, C wrong for this. So, the professor, the atheist biology professor, goes to everybody and says, guys, I know 2 people cheated here. Why? Because what do you think the probability of that happening is? You guys getting the same thing? It's impossible. And I was thinking in my head, like, bruh, the universe. You don't say the same thing about universe. When it comes to this school, you rely on probabilities. When it comes to the universe, no, it doesn't apply to the universe and there being a God, and right? Isn't that nuts?
It's a great point.
It's a great point. Why? You see, that's why we have a whole there's a whole section in the book on why people are atheists. The whole like psychology behind it. I kind of mentioned it a little bit from that quote, but we'll get more into that topic. But the idea is what? It's crazy. So according to New York Times bestselling author Eric Metaxas, he says, simply put, the odds against life in the universe are astonishing. Yet here we are. To take this a step further, the fine-tuning necessary for life to exist on a planet is nothing compared with the fine-tuning required for the universe to exist at all. So that's what I was saying before. Okay, we talked about life. What about the universe existing? There are so many parameters in order for the universe to exist right now that the odds of the universe existing are so heart-stoppingly astronomical that the notion that it all just happened defies common sense. Could it really be that every one of those many parameters has been perfectly met by accident? At what point is it fair to admit that it is science itself that suggests that we cannot be a result of random forces? Doesn't assuming that intelligence that is beyond space and time that created these perfect conditions in fact requires far less faith than believing that a life-sustaining Earth and universe just happened to beat the inconceivable odds? That's Eric Metaxas. That's his quote right there. The way he says it's so beautiful, We must understand that life coming into existence by itself is extremely improbable, let alone the whole universe. In regards to the fine-tuning argument, even Christopher Hitchens, one of the biggest atheists, who was one of the atheists' most aggressive advocates, said without a question the fine-tuning argument was the most powerful argument of the other side. Okay, so now it says here that if you're interested in learning more about the topics of evolution, age of the universe, caveman, Homo sapiens, free will, these are topics all in the appendix. Because obviously once you go through these questions, whoa, what about evolution? What about age of the universe? So it was brought down just to see the appendix, to see the opinion over there. Now, all right, now that we got that through, so we basically proved, or we brought compelling evidence. Again, the word proof is I don't like the word proof because there's no such thing as 100% proof, but we use the word because it's a very convenient word. But let's say the word compelling evidence or whatever. And if I say proof, just forgive me. But we bring 100%, we brought very, very compelling evidence that there must be a God. And we said in the previous class that not only is there a God, but scientifically he must be running the world. Logically he must be running the world. Why? Because if there's an infinite creator, right, how can the infinite and finite coexist? Right? If God's infinite, God's all-encompassing, how can there be finite? So I said the example that imagine you're thinking about an apple tree, right? Or you can imagine in your head an apple tree, an orange tree, right? Is that taking up any space? Is that making a difference? No. But that thought, without the thinker, there wouldn't be the thought. If you weren't there to think, there would be no thought of the apple tree. Same idea with the universe in a sense. Imagine God is imagining the universe. It's just a mashal, an example just to get the point across because it's very hard to imagine. But it makes the point. This universe is dependent on God. God is not dependent on the universe. Without the universe, there'll still be God. But without God, there wouldn't be a universe. Meaning God is, in a sense, imagining the universe. Obviously, everything is real and we have to, if you hit your arm against a table, it's going to hurt. Just because God's imagining the universe, in a sense, right? But it's as if, kavyachol, we say in Hebrew, that is as if we're in God's mind. So we wouldn't exist right now if God wasn't, in a sense, imagining us to exist. Without God, there wouldn't be a universe. There wouldn't be us, right? So you see from there, right? The finite and the infinite and finite could exist, and that answers the question of the clockmaker theory. How do you know God didn't just create the world and leave? Maybe he created the world like I could create a clock and bounce, right? The answer is no, because the clock is independent. It's an independent item. It doesn't need anything. It's not relying on anything to exist, right? But the universe is relying on God, right? God has to imagine. God has to bring it into being. So that's the idea with that. So now we know that God exists and God's running the world. Now, this whole book builds on top of each other. That's the beauty of the book. It's not like, okay, just telling you to believe this, trying to believe that. It proved everything from the foundational core. So now that we believe there's a God and God runs the world, the next inherent question is, what's the purpose of the world? Why are we in this world? He's infinite. He's above space. He's above time. He's not lacking anything. What does he need? Did he create the world because he's bored? But to say he's bored, that means he's not infinite. It means he's lacking. So obviously, if he didn't create it for himself, like if you were going, let's say we're before the creation of the universe, right? And it was just God. What would make sense for God to do? Create a universe or not create a universe?
Create it.
Why? I'm perfect. I don't need to get anything. I'm a billionaire. Why do I need to make more money? I mean, that might not be such a good example, but the idea is God's perfect. He's not lacking. He doesn't need to do anything. And if he did that, why didn't he do that a billion years before in a sense? You know, obviously there's no time, but just saying, meaning there's no point that really he did, it should make sense for him not to create a world. There's no point if he's perfect. So if he did create a world, right, he's not bored. He obviously did it for a purpose. There's a reasoning. There's a purpose. Now that we see a world, there must be a reason. There must be a purpose, yeah, from our perspective. So that's the next idea. So if there's a purpose, God obviously had to communicate to mankind what that purpose is, right? What's the time right now?
7:59.
Okay, let's go for... Should we? You know what? Let's end here, honestly, because this is a whole section. I don't think we're going to finish. But I gave you the prelude for the next section. The next question is going to go into the idea basically of what? That now that we know that there must be a God and a creator, there must be a purpose. There must be a reason why he created the world and he's not be born. And that's where religion comes in. That's where all the religions say, oh, because God, obviously, if we're the most complex beings, right, he must have communicated to mankind like what the purpose is. So that's where religion comes in. Every religion tries to claim that God gave me the truth, God gave me the truth. So now our goal is, let's analyze the religion, let's analyze the top religions, let's analyze the ones who are making the right claims, right? If a religion doesn't make a claim they have connection to God, we obviously don't care about them. The ones who are saying that God gave them an instruction manual or told them the purpose of life, let's look into those and analyze it. And yeah, we're going to go into the next section of moral argument. So we'll end it here. Thanks for listening.